I walked into our house that evening, exhausted from a long day at work, expecting the usual comfort of home. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air felt different, heavy with a tension I couldn't quite place. I made my way up the stairs, and as I approached our bedroom, my heart began to race. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the dark hallway. I pushed it open, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was in disarray. Clothes were strewn across the floor, pillows were scattered, and the bed, our bed, was unmade in a way that screamed of hasty abandonment. My eyes fell on something that didn't belong, a pair of men's watches on the nightstand. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Those were not mine. I stood there frozen, a thousand thoughts racing through my mind. How long had this been going on? Who was he? And most importantly, how could she do this to me? Anger, hurt, and confusion churned within me, creating a storm I struggled to contain. I backed out of the room, needing a moment to collect myself. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, my head spinning. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was undeniable proof. Laura, my wife, was cheating on me. I knew I couldn't confront her right away. I needed to think, to plan. I needed evidence, something concrete that she couldn't deny. With my heart pounding in my chest, I made a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. This betrayal would not go unpunished. As I stood there, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. But amidst the pain, a steely resolve began to form. Laura's deceit had shattered my world, but I would make sure that she faced the consequences of her actions. This was only the beginning. The following days were a blur of forced smiles and calculated calm. I continued to go about my daily routine, masking the turmoil that raged within me. Laura seemed oblivious to my growing suspicions, which both infuriated and saddened me. How had we come to this? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I needed to stay focused. I knew I needed proof, something irrefutable. After some research, I bought a set of discrete cameras and audio recorders. Installing them in our bedroom and living room took careful planning. I waited until Laura had left for one of her yoga classes, an activity I now questioned, before I carefully set up the equipment, ensuring it was hidden from obvious view. That evening, I felt a sense of grim determination. Sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, I kept an eye on Laura as she moved around the house. She was distracted, checking her phone frequently and smiling at messages she received. My stomach churned, but I kept my expression neutral. The first few days yielded nothing conclusive. Laura's behavior was suspicious, but there were no damning interactions caught on camera. I began to wonder if I had been mistaken, or if perhaps my suspicions were unfounded. But then, on the fourth day, I found what I had been looking for. It was a Saturday afternoon. Laura had gone out, claiming she was meeting a friend for lunch. I took the opportunity to review the footage. As I fast-forwarded through the recording, I noticed a period where Laura was talking on the phone, her voice low and intimate. I slowed the footage and turned up the volume. "Miss you too," she was saying, her voice soft and filled with an affection I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. "I can't wait to see you again." My hands tightened into fists as I listened. She continued to speak, mentioning a meeting at a hotel the following week. It was all there, the proof I needed. My heart ached with betrayal, but there was also a grim satisfaction in knowing my instincts had been correct. I transferred the recordings to my computer, creating backups just in case. The evidence was clear and damning. Laura had been unfaithful, and now I had the proof. That evening, Laura returned home, her mood bright and cheerful. I watched her closely, feeling like an outsider in my own life. She kissed me on the cheek, asking about my day. I forced a smile, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband, all the while planning my next move. The betrayal was complete, but so was my resolve. Laura thought she had hidden her secret well, but now the tables were turned. I would gather more evidence, ensure there was no way for her to deny it, and then I would confront her. The storm was brewing, and Laura had no idea it was coming. As the days passed, I continued to play my part, the loving, unsuspecting husband. Inside, however, I was a cauldron of simmering rage and cold calculation. I knew that confronting Laura without a solid plan would be a mistake. I needed to ensure that when the time came, she would have no escape. I began to think about our history, replaying moments from our relationship in my mind. Memories of when we first met, our wedding day, and the promises we made to each other came flooding back, each one now tainted by her betrayal. These memories fueled my determination to see this through. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer, making sure it was during one of Laura's supposed yoga classes. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, listened attentively as I explained the situation, his expression professional but sympathetic. "I understand your position, Mr. Anderson," he said, leaning forward. "Gathering evidence is crucial. The more irrefutable proof you have, the better your position will be in court. Have you considered your financial situation and the division of assets?" "I have," I replied, showing him the documentation I had been meticulously collecting. "I've started transferring funds to a separate account and gathering all important financial records." "Smart move," he said, nodding. "Keep doing what you're doing. And if you can, try to get more evidence of her infidelity. Courts tend to favor the wrong spouse when there's clear proof." With Mr. Thompson's advice in mind, I returned home, and my resolve strengthened. I continued to gather evidence, recording every interaction, every whispered phone call, every suspicious text message. The more I uncovered, the more my anger grew, but I channeled it into my preparations. One evening, as Laura prepared dinner, I stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching her. She hummed a tune, completely unaware of my scrutiny. It struck me how normal she seemed, how easily she lied and deceived. The thought made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing up at me with a smile. "Yeah, just tired from work," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. "Dinner smells great." She beamed at the compliment, turning back to the stove. I clenched my fists, the sight of her feigned innocence almost too much to bear. But I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. Not yet. The next few days were a waiting game. I reviewed the footage, compiling a comprehensive file of evidence. Each night, I backed up the recordings and documents, ensuring nothing would be lost. I also began to subtly manipulate Laura, planting seeds of doubt and guilt in her mind. "Work's been stressful," I mentioned one evening, watching her reaction closely. "But I'm glad I have you to come home to." She looked up, her eyes flickering with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Perhaps. But she quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course, honey. I'm always here for you." I almost laughed at the irony of her words. She had no idea that her world was about to come crashing down. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to play my role, all the while preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I knew that when the moment came, I needed to be ready, both emotionally and strategically. The calm before the storm was nearly over. Laura's betrayal would soon be laid bare, and she would have to face the consequences of her actions. The end was approaching, and I was ready. The more evidence I gathered, the clearer my path became. I knew I had to secure my financial future before confronting Laura. If she realized I knew about her infidelity before I was ready, she might try to sabotage my plans. So I continued my charade. While behind the scenes, I was making moves to protect myself. First, I set up a new bank account under my name only. I transferred a substantial amount of money into it, ensuring that I would have enough to cover any immediate expenses once the storm hit. I also took out some cash and stored it in a safe place, just in case. I reviewed all our financial documents, making copies of everything important: bank statements, mortgage documents, insurance policies, and investment portfolios. I stored these copies in a secure location outside the house, so they would be safe from any potential tampering. Next, I met with a financial advisor, someone I could trust. I explained my situation, omitting the most personal details, and he helped me create a plan to protect my assets. We restructured some investments and transferred ownership of a few key assets to ensure they wouldn't be part of the marital property division. I also looked into our joint accounts and credit cards. I monitored Laura's spending, noting any unusual or extravagant expenses. It was clear she was using our money to fund her secret life with Mark. This information would be useful during the divorce proceedings, further solidifying my case. One evening, Laura mentioned wanting to buy new furniture for the living room. She spoke with enthusiasm about the style she liked, showing me pictures on her phone. I nodded and smiled, but inside I seethed at her audacity. "That sounds nice," I said, playing along. "Why don't you go ahead and pick out what you like? Just let me know the cost." Her eyes lit up with excitement, and she kissed me on the cheek. Thanks, honey. I knew you'd understand. Little did she know, I had no intention of letting her spend another dime of our money on her whims. I was simply buying time, keeping her placated while I finished my preparations. As the weeks passed, I noticed Laura becoming more distant. She spent more time on her phone, often stepping outside to take calls. She made excuses to go out more frequently, and when she was home, she seemed distracted. It was clear that her affair with Mark was intensifying. I used this to my advantage, continuing to gather evidence and strengthen my financial position. Every time she left the house, I reviewed the footage and recordings, adding to my growing collection of proof. One day, while Laura was out, I discovered an email she had left open on our shared computer. It was from Mark, discussing their plans for a weekend getaway. They had booked a room at a nearby hotel, the same one she had mentioned during her phone call. My anger flared, but I quickly took screenshots and saved them as additional evidence. With my finances secure and my evidence solid, I knew the time to confront Laura was drawing near. But I needed one more piece to complete my plan. I needed to know everything about Mark. I hired a private investigator to dig into Mark's life. I wanted to know where he worked, where he lived, if he had a family, and any skeletons in his closet. If Mark was going to be part of Laura's betrayal, he deserved to face the consequences too. As the investigator began his work, I continued my facade, biding my time. The financial preparations were complete, and the evidence was damning. I was ready for the confrontation, ready to tear down the illusion Laura had so carefully constructed. The storm was almost here, and I was prepared for the fallout. The days passed with agonizing slowness as I waited for the private investigator to gather information on Mark. I continued my act, playing the devoted husband, all the while feeling the weight of Laura's betrayal pressing down on me. Each smile, each tender moment, was a lie, a reminder of the deception that had infiltrated our lives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I received a call from the investigator, John Reynolds. We arranged to meet at a small, discreet cafe on the other side of town. I arrived early, anxious to hear what he had uncovered. John walked in, a man in his mid-40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. He carried a briefcase and a folder, which he placed on the table as he sat down. "Mr. Anderson," he began, "I've gathered quite a bit of information on Mark Hastings. I think you'll find it very enlightening." He opened the folder and began to lay out photographs, documents, and reports. Mark Hastings, 36 years old, works as a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm downtown. He's single, no children, but he's had several relationships over the years, none of which lasted more than a few months. John handed me a series of photos showing Mark at various locations, his office, his apartment, and most importantly, with Laura. They looked happy, comfortable, and completely at ease with each other. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and disgust. "He's been seeing your wife for about 6 months," John continued. "They meet frequently at his apartment and occasionally at hotels. He's been quite careful, but not careful enough." I clenched my fists under the table, my mind racing. "What about his personal life? Anything that could be used against him?" John nodded. "He's been involved in some shady business dealings. Nothing illegal that we can prove, but it is enough to ruin his reputation if it came to light. He's also been seeing another woman on the side. Apparently, he's not as committed to Laura as she thinks." This revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Not only was Laura betraying me, but she was being betrayed herself. The irony was almost too much to bear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Thank you, John. This is exactly what I needed. Can you get me copies of everything?" "Of course," he replied, gathering the documents and placing them back in the folder. "I'll have everything ready for you by tomorrow." I paid John and left the cafe, my mind reeling with the new information. Mark was not just a homewrecker. He was a liar and a cheat, and now I had the ammunition I needed to take him down, along with Laura. That evening, I sat in my study, going over the evidence once more. Every piece of information, every photo, every document was another nail in the coffin of their deceit. I carefully organized everything, creating a comprehensive dossier that would leave no room for doubt. Laura came home late that night, her face flushed with excitement. She greeted me with a kiss, which I returned with practiced ease. She had no idea that her world was about to be shattered. Work ran late, she said, heading to the kitchen to grab a glass of wine. How was your day? Busy, I replied, forcing a smile, but productive. She smiled back, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As she sipped her wine, I watched her, my resolve hardening. The time for confrontation was drawing near, and I was ready. Over the next few days, I finalized my preparations. I gathered all the evidence, secured my finances, and planned my next moves with meticulous care. The investigator's findings had given me the edge I needed, and now it was time to use it. The storm was about to break, and Laura and Mark were going to be swept away by the torrent of their own making. The endgame was in sight, and I was prepared to see it through to the bitter end. The calm before the storm had lasted long enough. It was time to start manipulating Laura, planting seeds of doubt and guilt that would make the eventual confrontation even more devastating. I needed her to feel the weight of her actions, to sense that something was terribly wrong before I revealed the full extent of her betrayal. It started subtly. I began making offhand comments about infidelity, using stories from colleagues or fictional anecdotes. I hoped to trigger a reaction, a sign that she was feeling the pressure of her deceit. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I turned on the TV and flipped through the channels. I landed on a talk show discussing the fallout of cheating in relationships. The host was interviewing a couple who had gone through a messy divorce after one had been unfaithful. Have you seen this? I asked casually, nodding towards the screen. It's amazing how betrayal can completely destroy a marriage. Laura glanced at the TV, her face momentarily paling before she forced a smile. Yeah, I guess it's pretty rough, but that's not something we have to worry about, right? I nodded, noting the slight edge in her voice. Of course not. But it's a good reminder to appreciate what we have. I could see her trying to mask her discomfort, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. I knew I was hitting a nerve. The more I planted these seeds, the more anxious she became. A few days later, I took another approach. I started talking about a friend whose spouse had confessed to cheating, and the story was filled with regret and sorrow. I watched Laura's reactions closely, observing her growing unease. That's a tough situation, I said thoughtfully. I can't imagine being in their shoes. I mean, how do you even come back from something like that? Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. It must be really hard, she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. But if both people are committed to fixing things, I suppose there's hope. Her response was telling. It seemed like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I noted her reaction with grim satisfaction. As the days went by, I intensified my strategy. I began mentioning how important it was for couples to be transparent and honest with each other. I made sure to use phrases like trust and commitment in conversations. The goal was to make Laura confront her own actions, even if she wasn't ready to admit them yet. During dinner one night, I made a point of discussing the importance of open communication in relationships. It's amazing how many problems can be avoided just by talking honestly, I said. Sometimes we don't even realize how much we're hiding from each other. Laura looked down at her plate, her fork pausing midair. Yeah, honesty is definitely important, she said quietly. Her reaction was almost palpable. She was feeling the weight of her guilt, though she was still trying to maintain her composure. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of anxiety that betrayed her internal struggle. As I continued with my manipulation, I also started to subtly question her about her whereabouts. I would ask about her plans, or who she was meeting with, not in an accusatory way, but with a casual curiosity. The goal was to keep her on edge, to make her feel like her every move was being scrutinized. One day, as she was preparing to leave for a lunch date, I asked, "Who are you meeting today?" "Just some friends from work," she replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "We're catching up over coffee." I nodded, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Sounds nice. Hope you have a good time." Her smile was strained as she left the house, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. She was starting to crack under the pressure, and it was only going to get worse. That night, I sat down to review the latest footage and recordings. I had amassed quite a collection of evidence, and every piece reinforced my resolve. The emotional manipulation was working, and Laura was beginning to show signs of guilt and unease. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction as I watched her react to my subtle probes. The stage was set, and the final confrontation was approaching. The manipulation was complete, and Laura was now primed for the revelation of her betrayal. The storm was no longer just a distant rumble. It was drawing closer, and I was ready to face it head-on. The day had come. After weeks of gathering evidence and manipulating Laura, I knew it was time for the confrontation. The buildup of deceit, guilt, and anxiety had reached its peak, and I was ready to reveal everything. I had carefully planned the moment to ensure that Laura would have nowhere to hide, and that the full impact of her betrayal would hit her with undeniable force. It was a Wednesday evening, the day Laura usually returned home later than usual from her weekly book club meeting. I made sure to keep my demeanor calm and composed throughout the day, preparing myself mentally for the confrontation. I spent the afternoon reviewing the evidence one last time, ensuring that I had everything in order. When Laura walked through the door, she looked as cheerful as ever, her face glowing from what she likely thought was a harmless evening out. She greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, her enthusiasm masking the tension I knew was simmering just beneath the surface. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice light and carefree. "How was your day?" "It was all right," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk for a bit. Do you have a moment?" Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her features. "Sure," she said, setting her purse down and following me to the living room. "What's on your mind?" I gestured for her to sit on the couch, while I remained standing, pacing slowly in front of her. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts and focusing on the task at hand. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I needed to remain calm and collected. "Laura," I began, "I've been doing some thinking. Over the past few weeks, I've noticed that something's been off. I've seen signs that indicate you might not be completely honest with me." Her eyes widened in surprise, her posture stiffening. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked over to a drawer and pulled out a folder filled with evidence. I set it down on the coffee table in front of her and opened it, revealing a series of photographs, text messages, and screenshots of emails. "This," I said, pointing to the documents, "is what I found. I have video footage, photographs, and even emails between you and Mark Hastings." Laura's face turned pale as she looked at the evidence laid out before her. Her hands trembled slightly and she swallowed hard. How did you find this?" "I've been watching," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "I set up cameras, recorded conversations, and hired a private investigator. I wanted to be absolutely sure before confronting you." Tears began to well up in her eyes, and she looked away from the evidence, unable to meet my gaze. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising with anger. "You've been seeing Mark for months. You've been lying to me, spending our money on him, and betraying everything we've built together. Do you think an apology is going to fix this?" "I made a mistake," Laura said, her voice breaking. "It was a stupid mistake, but I never wanted to hurt you." "A mistake?" I said, incredulous. "This wasn't just a mistake, Laura. It was a deliberate betrayal. You've been hiding this from me, lying to my face, and now you expect me to just forgive and forget?" I could see the realization dawning on her, the full weight of her actions hitting her with brutal clarity. She began to sob, her hands covering her face as she wept. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice muffled by her hands. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Sorry isn't enough," I said firmly. "You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I've already consulted with a lawyer and taken steps to protect my assets. I'm filing for divorce, and there's nothing you can do to change that." Laura looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please don't do this," she begged. "We can work through this. I'll do anything." "There's nothing left to work through," I said, my voice resolute. "The trust has been broken beyond repair. I've given you every opportunity to come clean, to be honest, but you chose to deceive me instead." I watched as she sank into the couch, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The confrontation had been difficult, but it was necessary. I needed to end the charade and move forward with my life. "I'm going to make arrangements for you to move out," I continued. "I'll ensure that you have a place to stay and that you're taken care of during the transition. But this marriage is over." Laura nodded weakly, her tears still flowing. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." As I turned to leave the room, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The storm had finally broken, and the truth was out in the open. The path ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it. The betrayal was behind me, and now it was time to start rebuilding my life. The confrontation had been intense, but it had also been necessary. The damage was done, and the consequences were clear. It was time for me to move on and seek the peace and closure that had been so cruelly taken from me. The days following the confrontation with Laura were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The house, once filled with the illusion of normalcy, now felt empty and cold. The confrontation had left its mark, and I was left to navigate the aftermath of Laura's betrayal and the impending divorce. The first step was dealing with the practicalities of ending a marriage. I contacted a moving company to arrange for Laura's belongings to be packed and moved to her new apartment. I had already set up a temporary place for her, ensuring she wouldn't have to find her own accommodation immediately. Despite the animosity between us, I wanted to make the transition as smooth as possible for her. Laura's move was a somber affair. I watched from a distance as the movers packed her things, her once familiar belongings, now being carted away. She looked haggard and defeated, her eyes red from crying. There were no words exchanged, no final attempts to mend what had been broken. The silence between us was deafening. Once she had left, I took a deep breath and surveyed the house. The emptiness was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous days. The once warm home now felt like a hollow shell, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I took solace in knowing that I had taken control of the situation, but the emotional toll was heavy. The next few weeks were filled with legal meetings, paperwork, and more emotional strain. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was meticulous in ensuring that all aspects of the divorce were handled properly. We reviewed the evidence of Laura's infidelity and its impact on the division of assets. I was determined to protect my financial interests, and Mr. Thompson was thorough in his approach. During this period, I also took time to focus on my own well-being. I sought counseling to help me process the emotional aftermath of the betrayal. Speaking to a therapist helped me navigate the complex feelings of anger, sadness, and betrayal. It was a necessary step in my healing process, and it provided me with clarity and perspective. The divorce proceedings were a matter of formality, but the emotional impact was profound. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the life we had once shared. The proceedings were straightforward, but the sense of finality was overwhelming. It marked the end of a significant chapter in my life and the beginning of a new, uncertain future. One day, as I was going through the final paperwork, I received a call from Laura. Her voice was hesitant, tinged with a mix of regret and desperation. She wanted to meet and talk, to perhaps find some closure. I agreed to meet her, though I was uncertain about what would come from it. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one where I had first met with John Reynolds. Laura arrived looking worn, but composed. She sat down across from me, her eyes reflecting a blend of sadness and hope. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she began softly. "I wanted to apologize in person, to explain." "There's no need for explanations," I interrupted gently. "I've heard enough. What's done is done. The trust is gone, and that can't be repaired." "I know," she said, tears welling up again. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I made a terrible mistake, and I regret it more than you could ever know." I looked at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't change what happened. We both need to move forward." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "I understand. I'm trying to move on too. I just hope you can find some peace." "I hope so too," I replied. "I wish you the best, Laura." We parted ways, the conversation providing a measure of closure, but not erasing the pain. As I drove home, I reflected on our final meeting. It was a poignant reminder of the complexity of human emotions, even in the face of betrayal. The weeks that followed were focused on rebuilding and finding a sense of normalcy. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and gradually reconnected with friends and family. The healing process was slow, but each day brought new opportunities for growth and self-discovery. The fallout from Laura's betrayal had been intense, but it had also been a catalyst for change. I was learning to navigate the complexities of life after betrayal and divorce, finding strength in the midst of adversity. As I looked toward the future, I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was determined to move forward, to embrace the new chapter of my life with resilience and hope. The storm had passed, and I was ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks turned into months, Laura's departure became a distant but painful memory. I was adjusting to life alone, rebuilding my routines, and slowly finding a new sense of normalcy. However, despite the passage of time, it seemed that Laura was struggling to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. One evening, as I was relaxing at home, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Laura. Her voice was shaky, and there was a desperation in her tone that I hadn't heard before. "Hi, it's Laura," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. The last time we spoke, we had parted on what I thought was a final note. "What's this about?" I asked cautiously. I need to see you," she pleaded. "I'm in a difficult place right now, and I don't know where to turn. Please, just give me a chance to explain." There was a tone of urgency in her voice that made me uneasy. I agreed to meet her, but only in a public place where I could maintain some distance and ensure that the situation remained controlled. We decided to meet at a quiet park nearby. The setting was calm and serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had become our lives. When Laura arrived, she looked disheveled and worn out. Her eyes were red, and she appeared to have lost weight. It was clear that she had been struggling. She approached me with a tentative smile, but her expression quickly faltered as she saw the look on my face. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit on a nearby bench. "What's going on, Laura? Why did you want to see me?" She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been having a really hard time since we last spoke. I made a huge mistake, and it's been haunting me every day. Mark and it didn't work out. He's been distant and detached, and I'm left feeling lost and alone." I listened quietly, trying to gauge her sincerity. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I struggled to muster any sympathy. "But how does this concern me?" "Because," she continued, her voice cracking, "I realize now that I made a terrible mistake not just with Mark, but with everything. I thought I could make things work, but I was wrong. I'm not asking for us to get back together. I know that's not possible. I just need your help. I'm in a difficult financial situation, and I don't know what to do." I was taken aback. "You're asking me for help? After everything that's happened?" "I know it's a lot to ask," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm desperate. I don't have anyone else to turn to. I thought if I could just explain, maybe you'd understand." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to show compassion, to help someone who was clearly in distress. But another part of me was still reeling from the betrayal and anger. The memories of her infidelity and the pain it caused were still fresh. "What kind of help are you looking for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Financial assistance," she admitted. "I'm behind on my rent and bills, and I'm struggling to find a job. I never imagined things would turn out this way. I'm not asking for a handout. I just need some support to get back on my feet." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. "I can't offer you a financial handout," I said firmly, "but I'm willing to help you find resources or connect you with services that might assist with your situation. However, I need to be clear that this doesn't change anything between us. The past is still there, and I need to move forward." Laura nodded, her face reflecting a mix of relief and resignation. "I understand. I appreciate any help you can offer." We talked for a while longer, discussing potential resources and organizations that could provide her with the assistance she needed. I provided her with contact information and offered some advice on how to navigate her situation. As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Helping Laura was a difficult decision, but it was also a step towards closure and moving on from the past. It was clear that she was struggling, and while I couldn't change the past, I could offer a measure of support to help her through this challenging time. The encounter left me feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. I had faced the past and done what I could to help Laura without compromising my own boundaries. It was a step toward finding peace and moving forward with my life. As I walked away from the park, I reflected on the complexities of human relationships and the importance of finding closure and moving on. The fallout from Laura's betrayal had been profound, but I was determined to embrace the future with hope and resilience. The days following my meeting with Laura were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. I had offered what help I could, and with that, had put the final chapter of our tumultuous relationship behind me. It was time to focus on the future, to rebuild my life, and to seek out new beginnings. The house, once shared with Laura, had become a space of transformation. I had made changes to the decor, replaced old painful reminders with new vibrant pieces. Each alteration was a symbolic step toward healing and starting afresh. I spent weekends gardening, painting, and organizing, turning the once stifling space into a reflection of my new beginning. Work became a central focus during this period. I threw myself into projects with renewed energy and enthusiasm. The professional successes that followed were gratifying, a reminder that I was capable of thriving even after the emotional upheaval. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, and their support was invaluable as I navigated this new chapter in my life. I also made a concerted effort to reconnect with friends and family. The betrayal had isolated me in many ways, but I was determined to rebuild these important relationships. Reconnecting with old friends and spending time with family provided comfort and joy, reaffirming that despite the pain, I was not alone. One evening, as I sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain of betrayal and the challenges of the divorce had been immense, but they had also taught me valuable lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of moving forward. I had started attending a local support group for individuals who had experienced similar betrayals. The shared stories and experiences helped me process my emotions and gain perspective. It was reassuring to hear that others had faced and overcome their own struggles, and it provided me with a sense of solidarity and hope. As the months passed, I began to explore new interests and passions. I took up cooking classes, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I discovered a love for hiking, finding solace and inspiration in nature. These new experiences became sources of joy and personal growth, helping me to redefine myself and embrace life's possibilities. Despite the progress I had made, there were still moments of reflection and sadness. Occasionally, I would find myself thinking about the past and the dreams that had been shattered. But these moments were becoming less frequent, overshadowed by the excitement of new opportunities and the promise of a brighter future. One day, as I walked through a local art gallery, I met someone who would come to play an important role in my life. Her name was Julia, and she was an artist who had a deep appreciation for the beauty in everyday moments. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I was drawn to her kindness and optimism. Over time, our friendship grew into something more meaningful, and I found myself opening up to the possibility of a new relationship. Julia and I spent time exploring new places, enjoying shared interests, and supporting each other's goals. Her presence in my life was a gentle reminder that love and connection could still be found, even after the pain of betrayal. She was a beacon of light, guiding me toward a future filled with hope and possibility. Looking back, the journey had been arduous, but it had also been transformative. The pain of betrayal had been a catalyst for growth, and the challenges I had faced had strengthened my resolve. I had emerged from the storm not only intact, but stronger, with a renewed appreciation for life and its possibilities. As I stood on the brink of this new chapter, I felt a sense of peace and optimism. The past was behind me, and the future was full of promise. I was ready to embrace it with an open heart, to continue growing, and to build a life that was rich with meaning and joy. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was prepared to face it with courage and hope. The journey had been difficult, but it had led me to a place of understanding and resilience. I was ready to move forward, to live fully, and to embrace the new beginnings that awaited me.